Nathaniel Cole read the note standing in the Dillon dust, and his hand stopped moving. She knows what we did. Keep her away from Philadelphia. Keep her quiet. This is not a request. No signature. He read it again, folded it, put it against his chest inside his shirt, where it sat like something burning. The stage door opened from inside. A woman stepped down. She was younger than her letters. Her left cheekbone carried a bruise, the deep purple of a week-old wound, the size of a man's knuckle, the angle of a right hand that hadn't held back. She looked at him the way a person looks at the last door left in a burning building. If this story already has your chest tight, do us one kindness. Subscribe to the channel, hit that bell, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from tonight. We want to see how far Clara Ashworth's story travels. Stay with us. What happens in the next 2 hours will change everything she thought she knew about who gets to decide what a woman is worth. The note had come off the stage before she did. Gideon, the driver who ran the Miles City to Dillon line 3 times a week, had tossed a brown envelope onto the depot bench without ceremony, tucked against a battered leather valise with one clasp missing, the other fastened with knotted cord. No return address. Philadelphia postmark, 3 weeks old. Nathaniel Cole had read it twice, standing alone in the afternoon heat, with the paper shaking in his fist and no wind to blame it on. She is being sent to you because she cannot stay here. She knows things she was not supposed to know. If she speaks to anyone about the Ashworth contract, she will cause serious harm to serious people. Keep her away from Philadelphia. Keep her quiet. This is not a request. He folded it, pressed it flat, put it inside his shirt, against his sternum, and stood with his hand over it for a moment, the way you press a hand over a wound before you decide what to do next. Then the stage door opened. She pushed it herself, both hands on the frame. No waiting on Gideon, no waiting on anyone. She stepped down onto the iron footplate and then onto the ground, and stood there with the broken valise held in front of her in both hands, like the only thing she had left, which was close enough to the truth. Then she looked up. Nate had known the bruise was coming. The note had told him something was wrong, but knowing didn't help. The left cheekbone, swollen, purple-black at the center, yellowing at the edges. 5 days old, 6 at most. The angle said right-handed. The depth said no hesitation. The color said it hadn't been the first time. He felt the muscles in his jaw lock. He breathed through it. She was already looking at his hands. He'd seen horses do that. Track hands before faces. Measure threat before measuring intent. Her eyes moved from his hands to his belt to his face, and the whole inventory took less than 2 seconds and told him more about the last year of her life than her 3 letters combined. Miss Ashworth, he said. Low. Even. She flinched, caught it, held herself still, and that effort, the visible effort of holding herself still when her body wanted to run, was something that settled into Nate's chest and stayed there. I'm Nate Cole, he said. Buckboard's out front, about an hour to the ranch. Road's not bad until the creek. She looked at him. I'm ready, Mr. Cole. He reached for the valise slowly. She watched his hand the whole way. He set the bag in the buckboard bed, offered her his hand to climb up. She didn't take it. She gripped the seat rail and pulled herself up and settled on the far end of the bench with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap, one on top of the other, covering the knuckles. Nate climbed up the other side, took the reins, clicked his tongue at the bay mare, and rolled them out of Dillon. The first mile passed without words. Clara Ashworth sat 3 feet away and watched the road unspool ahead of them and breathed carefully, the way a person breathes when they're trying to make sure no one can hear them doing it. Nate let the silence sit. He was a man who could work a whole day without words, but he could also hear the difference between comfortable silence and the silence of someone holding themselves together with both hands. "There's a woman named Ruth McAllister," he said, eyes on the horses. "Runs the telegraph office in Dillon. She's been managing what passes for the ranch accounts since my last hand quit. She is not quiet about the fact that it's not her job." Clara glanced at him. "You need the accounts managed." "I need someone who can read a contract without a 3-day ride to Billings." He shifted the reins. "Your letters said you worked 5 years in a law office." "I did." "What kind of work?" A pause. Small. The kind that means the answer is longer than the question deserves. "Ledgers? Reconciliations? I drafted correspondence, reviewed agreements before the partners signed." Her thumb pressed hard into the back of her other hand. "I'm good at finding things in documents that weren't meant to be found." Nate said nothing for a moment. Then he reached into his shirt pocket, took out the folded note, and set it on the bench between them without a word. Clara looked at it. Her hands went still. "Go ahead," Nate said. She picked it up, unfolded it, read it once. He watched her jaw lock, watched the color drain from her neck. She read it again, folded it back along the exact same creases, set it down. "My uncle," she said. "I figured. He uses lawyers." Her voice was flat, each word placed like she was setting down something fragile. He's not the kind of man who—" She stopped. "He has other people do the rest." "What did you find?" She looked at the road. A hawk circled something in the grass and dropped out of sight. "Contracts," she said. 15 of them. Ranch properties in Montana Territory, all within 40 miles of a proposed rail line. They looked like standard purchase agreements. They weren't. She said it the way you describe something you've stared at so long, the emotion has worn clean off it, down to the bare shape. There were clauses buried 4 layers deep in the technical language. A rancher would sign thinking he was taking a mortgage loan. What he actually signed was a conditional deed transfer. Miss one payment, one, and the title converts automatically to the lender. The buckboard hit a rut. Clara caught the seat rail and kept talking. "I made copies. I was going to take them to the land office in Helena." She looked down at her hands. "I told my uncle what I'd found. I thought—" The thumb pressed harder. "I thought he would want to know his firm's name was on documents designed to ruin 11 families." Nate waited. "He took my copies," she said. "He said I had misread the language. He said I needed to stop talking about it immediately." She turned and looked directly at him. No angle, no sideways glance, straight on. 3 weeks later, I was on a train to Montana." Nate drove for a moment without speaking. The ranch came around the long curve ahead. Main house, barn, the corral with the bay gelding running the far rail. "Those 15 ranches," he said carefully. "You have documentation?" "I kept a second set of copies." Her voice didn't change. "Separate from the ones he took. I've had them since the night I left Philadelphia." Nate pulled the buckboard to a stop in front of the porch, set the brake, sat. "Miss Ashworth." She looked at him. "That note was in my pocket before you stepped off that stage. I could have read it and put you on the return coach." He looked at the house, back at her. "I didn't. I want you to know why." "Why, Mr. Cole?" "Because whoever wrote it doesn't get to make decisions about my property or the people on it." He said it the way he'd say, "The south fence needs replacing." Already settled, not up for discussion. "Whatever you're carrying is your business until you decide otherwise. and nobody rides onto this land that you don't want here." Clara held his eyes, said nothing for a moment. Then, "Thank you, Mr. Cole." He got down and carried her valise up the porch steps. Inside, he moved to the back doorway. "Bedroom's through here. Bolts on the inside of the door. I put it in last month." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I've got a cot in the barn loft. I've been up there 2 weeks since your last letter. It's fine. You gave me the bedroom. There's only one. You've been in the loft 2 weeks. Seemed right." He picked up his hat from the nail by the door and put it on. "You need anything? Holler." He left. She stood in the front room and listened to his boots on the steps, on the dirt, fading toward the corral. She listened until the sounds placed him exactly. She went through to the bedroom. The bolt was new iron, bright, no rust, screwed in recently, screwed in for her. She pushed the door closed. Her fingers found the bolt. She slid it home. The sound it made, solid, final, iron on iron, stopped her breath. She stood with her hand on the bolt and her forehead against the door, and she thought about a different door in Philadelphia, the one that locked from the outside. The 3 nights she had sat on the floor of her uncle's office with her back against it, the documents inside her corset because there was nowhere else to put them, waiting for someone to unlock it from the other side. Warren Ashworth had stood in that hallway and told her, very quietly, through the oak, that she had 2 choices. She could give him the remaining copies and sign a statement that she had misread the contracts, or she could stay in that office until she was willing to. She had stayed 3 days. It was his wife, Margaret, who had finally turned the key, slipped it into the lock at 2 in the morning with her husband at his club, and whispered, "Go now, Clara, don't stop." She had not stopped. She had walked 4 flights of stairs and 6 blocks to the rail station and had not looked back once. The bolt on this door was on her side. She stood there until her heartbeat came back down from her throat. Then she straightened, slid the bolt open, and went to the kitchen to find flour. She was at the table working dough when she heard it. Boots on the porch. Not Nate's, too measured, too deliberate. The pace of a man who has decided in advance how he wants to sound arriving. She turned. A man stood in the doorway, 50, perhaps more. A suit brushed recently, and pressed not recently enough. Silver hair, trimmed beard. He held his hat in both hands, the gesture of a courteous man. And he was smiling. Not the way Nate's jaw occasionally shifted, an involuntary thing. This smile was a structure, built and maintained, the kind that costs nothing because there's nothing behind it. "You must be the new Mrs. Cole," he said. "Or very nearly." "Miss Ashworth," she said. Her hand stayed on the dough. "And you are?" "Harlan Briggs." A small inclination of the head, the movement of a man who expects his name to land with weight. "Land and legal agent for this district. I handle most of the ranch agreements in a 40-mile radius." He looked around the kitchen, a slow look, cataloging, and brought his eyes back to her face. "I was in Dillon this afternoon. Heard the stage came in. Wanted to welcome you personally. We don't get many arrivals from back east." Clara looked at him, at the smile, at the hands on the hat, at the distance between what his face was doing and what his eyes were doing. 5 years in a Philadelphia law office. She knew what it looked like when the surface and the structure were not the same document. "That's kind of you, Mr. Briggs," she said. "Nate is at the corral." "I'll stop by the corral." He didn't move. "What part of the East, if I may ask? I spent time in Baltimore myself." A pause, easy and unhurried. "Philadelphia?" He said it without inflection, without weight, like a man mentioning weather. She had said Pennsylvania on the buckboard to Nate. She had said Pennsylvania. He had said Philadelphia. "Pennsylvania," she said. "Excuse me, I need to get these off the heat before they stick." She turned her back to him and moved to the stove, and her hands were completely steady, and she was going to remember that later. "Corrals around the west side of the barn, Mr. Briggs." A pause behind her, long enough that she counted it. "Of course." His voice held its warmth, unhurried. "Welcome to Dillon, Miss Ashworth. I imagine we'll be seeing each other regularly." His boots retreated from the porch. Measured steps. No rush. The steps of a man who already knows he'll be back. Clara stood at the stove and did not move. He had said Philadelphia. She had not said Philadelphia. She pressed both hands flat against the wooden frame of the stovetop and stood very still and thought. He had been in Dillon this afternoon. The stage arrived early afternoon. He was here inside 2 hours, with his hat in his hands and a smile that was a building, not a feeling, and the word Philadelphia said like a man testing whether a door is locked. He knew her name before she walked through it. He had come to this ranch to look at her, to see what she was, what she carried, whether the problem that had been sent west from Philadelphia was going to stay quiet the way it was supposed to. She heard Nate's voice from outside, short, polite, a conversation being closed rather than opened. One set of hoofbeats, moving off toward the road. Then Nate's boots on the porch steps. He came in and looked at the biscuits on the pan and looked at her face. "That man," she said. "Briggs, district land agent. He's handled the paperwork around here since before my father died." Nate's voice was neutral. "He came out here once, about the north pasture boundary. Seemed above board." "Did your father sign anything with him?" Nate went still. "Mortgage agreement. 3 years ago. Bad seasons. Briggs arranged it through a Helena investment company." He set his hat on the nail. "We've been paying it down. Why?" "What was the company's name?" "Territorial Land Holdings." Clara untied the leather cord on the valise clasp. She had made a decision on the buckboard, coming over that last rise when the ranch appeared, that she would take 3 days before she showed anyone the documents, that she would watch first, that she would make sure. Harlan Briggs had just stepped onto this porch inside 2 hours of her arrival and said the word Philadelphia. 3 days had become 3 hours. She pulled out the oilskin packet from beneath her folded clothes and carried it to the table. "Sit down, Mr. Cole," she said. "Please." He sat. She untied the waxed string, opened the oilskin, and laid the documents out one at a time in order. The way she had been taught, slow and deliberate, each page placed where he could read it. And she watched his face as the stamp in the upper left corner of each page came into the lamplight. Territorial Land Holdings of Montana. 15 pages. 15 properties. 15 families who had signed what they believed was a loan. "This one first," she said. She pushed a page toward him and pointed to the third subparagraph 9 lines down. Dense language. The kind that looks like standard penalty boilerplate from a distance. The kind that is not. Read the clause beginning "in the event of default." Nate read it. His face held for a moment. Then something went tight around his eyes. Not anger. Not yet. The expression of a man who has just heard a board crack under his foot and is very carefully not moving. He looked up at her. "That's a deed transfer," he said. "Written to look like a penalty clause," Clara said. "In Montana territorial property law, it reads as automatic title conversion. Miss one payment, just one. The land goes to the lender." She slid a second page across. A handwritten list, copied from a corporate registration document in a Philadelphia records office 7 months ago, before her uncle took her keys. The principles behind territorial land holdings. Nate looked at the second name on the list. He sat back in the chair. The lamplight fell across his face and showed everything it showed. The clenched jaw, the flat eyes, the stillness of a man standing at the edge of something he cannot yet measure the depth of. "Harlan Briggs," he said. "Yes." The kitchen held the sound of the stove and the crickets outside, and nothing else. "How many of these ranches are already in default?" he said. "4 that I can verify have missed at least one payment in the last 18 months. She paused. "Yours has not. But the agreement your father signed has a different structure than the others. There's a second trigger clause I haven't fully analyzed. I need more time with it. My father didn't know what he was signing." "No one would have," Clara said. "It was designed to be unreadable. That's the entire point." Nate looked at the documents on the table, at the stamp, at the list with Briggs's name on it, at the woman sitting across from him who had carried this across 2,000 miles inside an oilskin packet because there was nowhere else to keep it and no one else to bring it to. "Miss Ashworth," he said. She looked at him. "Briggs was on this porch inside 2 hours of you arriving." "Yes." "He knew your name." "Yes." "Which means whoever arranged the match through the Philadelphia agency told him," Clara said. "Or is him. I don't know which yet." Her hands were in her lap, steady. "What I know is that he came here to see whether I was going to be a problem. And I know that the 4 families whose payments are already late don't know what is about to happen to their land." Nate was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the night had come on fully. Stars thick above the pasture, crickets loud in the grass, the horses moving in the corral with their slow, heavy footsteps. He looked at the trigger clause page again, read it again. Slowly, the second time, the way a man reads something he needs to understand at bone level before he decides what it requires of him. Then he set it down flat on the table and looked at her. "All right," he said. 2 words, said the way he'd said, "Nobody rides onto this land that you don't want here. Already settled. Weight already distributed. No performance in it." Clara looked at him across the lamplight and the documents and the distance that was no longer quite a full arm's length, and she felt the muscles between her shoulder blades begin, very slowly, one fiber at a time, to release. Not because she was safe. The documents were on a kitchen table in a ranch house in Montana, and Harlan Briggs was an hour down the road in Dillon, and 4 families were sleeping tonight without knowing their land was already spoken for. She was not safe. None of them were. But the papers were in the light. A man was reading them with the same face he used to read a fence line. And on the inside of the bedroom door, 12 feet away, a bolt sat in its housing. New iron, bright, no rust, waiting for her hand. She reached for her coffee cup. It had gone cold without her noticing. She drank it anyway. She woke before the rooster and lay still in the dark, listening to the ranch breathe. The stove in the front room, the horses in the corral shifting weight, wind moving through the gap under the door. Sounds that were not Philadelphia, not coal dust and cartwheels and the neighbor's dog going at 3 in the morning. These sounds had space between them, room to hear each one separately. She got up, braided her hair by feel, pinned it, laced her boots. The documents were where she'd left them, stacked and rewrapped in the oilskin on the kitchen table, the waxed string tied back around them. She had not been able to leave them in the bedroom. Some part of her needed to know they were on a flat surface in the open, not hidden, not locked away. She had spent enough time locked away with them. Nate was already at the stove, coffee poured, 2 cups on the table. He looked up when she came out and said nothing about the hour or the dark still pressing against the windows. Just nodded at the cups. She sat, wrapped both hands around the tin. The heat moved through her palms and up her wrists, and she held it there. "The trigger clause," she said. He looked at her over the rim of his cup. "The second one, in your father's contract." She set her cup down and pulled the oilskin toward her, untied it, found the page, slid it across the table, and put her finger on the paragraph near the bottom, the one she had read 4 times the night before, with the lamp burning down to nothing. "This isn't in the other 14 agreements, just yours." Nate set his cup down and read. She watched his face. His jaw worked once, then stopped. He read it a second time. "Say it plain," he said. "The standard clause converts the deed on missed payment. This one has an additional provision." She kept her voice even and precise. "If the property owner dies before the loan is satisfied, the conversion is immediate, regardless of payment status. The estate doesn't inherit. The title goes directly to territorial land holdings the day the death is recorded at the county office." Nate looked at the page. Then he looked at the table. Then he said, "My father died 11 months ago." "I know. I read the date on the agreement, and I read the death notice in the Dillon paper that Ruth McAllister sent with your second letter." She folded her hands on the table. "Nate, if that clause is enforceable under territorial law, this ranch already belongs to Harlan Briggs." The stove ticked. Outside, the rooster started. Nate put both hands flat on the table and looked at the page with the expression of a man who has just understood how long he has been standing on ice that was already cracked. Not panic. Something worse than panic. The cold, quiet recognition that the threat was not coming. It was already here, and had been here for 11 months. And he had been mending fences and paying installments on a ranch that had already been signed away under his boots. "He hasn't moved on it," Nate said. "No." "Why not?" "Because a dead man's son paying the installments on time looks like compliance," Clara said. "And because Briggs doesn't need to move on it yet. He has 14 other properties on that list. Yours is the largest." She paused. "And because, until this morning, no one in Dillon could read that clause well enough to know it existed." Nate was quiet for a long time. The light changed in the windows. Gray first, then the first thin edge of gold off the eastern ridge. "How do we fight it?" he said. "Not can we fight it. How?" She noted that. "The clause may not be enforceable," she said. "Montana territorial property law has specific language about estate inheritance rights that may supersede a private contract provision. But I'd need the territorial statutes to confirm it, and I'd need to compare this document against the original registration filing in Helena." She looked at him. "Is there a copy of your father's original agreement? The one he signed?" "Briggs has it." "Of course he does." She sat back. "Then we need the Helena records. The Territorial Land Office keeps copies of all registered agreements. If we can get a certified copy from Helena, and I can get to the statutes—" "Ruth McAllister," Nate said. Clara looked at him. "She's got the telegraph. If anyone can get a message to Helena and pull a legal response back inside a week, it's Ruth." He stood, picked up his cup, took it to the basin. "She's also the one who'll know if Briggs has been moving on any of the other properties on that list. She sees everything that comes through that wire." "You trust her?" "I trust her more than anyone else in this county." He turned around. "Including myself some days." They rode into Dillon at mid-morning with the oilskin packet wrapped in Clara's shawl and set between her feet on the buckboard floor. The main street was active in the way small towns are active. Not busy, but watched. Clara felt it the moment the buckboard rolled past the livery. The way heads turned, held a beat too long, then turned back. The rancher's mail-order bride, the woman from back east with the healing bruise and the Pennsylvania accent. She kept her chin level. The telegraph office sat beside the post office, in a narrow building that smelled of ink and dust and the particular metallic sharpness of the wire equipment. Ruth McAllister was behind the counter when they came in, a woman of 58, with silver hair pinned back so tightly it stretched the skin at her temples, and the hands of someone who had been hauling equipment and writing dispatches since before most of Dillon existed. She looked at Clara the way you look at a bolt of fabric you're considering. Direct, unhurried, deciding. "So you're the one from Philadelphia," Ruth said. "Pennsylvania," Clara said. Ruth looked at Nate. "She corrects people. I like her." She put both hands on the counter. "What do you need?" Nate put the oilskin on the counter and looked at Ruth steadily. "We need this kept between us." "Everything in this office is between us," Ruth said. "That's literally the law, Nate." Clara untied the packet and slid the document with the trigger clause across the counter. She watched Ruth read it, watched the moment Ruth's expression changed. Not dramatically, just a small tightening around the eyes. The look of someone who has been waiting for something bad to have a shape, and has just found out what shape it is. "Harlan Briggs," Ruth said. "You knew?" Clara said. "I knew something was wrong. I didn't know what." Ruth set the page down flat. 3 years ago, Briggs started handling all the ranch mortgage agreements in this district. Before that, people went to Billings or Helena for anything complicated. Suddenly there's a man here who'll do it locally for half the cost. She looked at Clara. "I sent 2 telegrams to Helena about him. Never got a useful answer. Now I know why." "He has contacts in the territorial office," Clara said. "Has to." Ruth picked up a pencil. "What do you need from me?" "A certified copy of the Cole Ranch Agreement from the Helena Land Records, and the full text of the Montana Territorial Estate Inheritance Statutes, sections 4 through 9. Clara paused. "And whatever you can find about who the second principal of territorial land holdings is. The corporate registration shows 2 names. The second one is redacted in the copy I have." Ruth wrote without stopping. "Timeline? As fast as the wire moves. The wire moves fast. The territorial office moves like a man deciding whether to get out of a warm bed." Ruth looked up. "Week, maybe 10 days for the certified copy. Statutes I can get in 2. 2 days for the statutes is fine," Clara said. Ruth looked at her again with that same measuring look, slower this time. Then she said, "You're not what I expected Nate Cole to order out of a Philadelphia catalog." "I wasn't ordered," Clara said. "I was sent." Ruth set her pencil down. Something shifted in her face. Not quite a smile, but the place where one would go if she let it. "That's a meaningful distinction," she said. "Sit down, both of you. I'm going to tell you about the Patterson Ranch." They sat on the 2 chairs against the wall, while Ruth remained standing behind her counter, and she told them. The Patterson family had missed a payment in March. 1 payment, $60 short, because the winter had killed 14 head and the spring calves hadn't come right. Calvin Patterson had gone to Briggs's office in early April to explain and arrange an extension. Briggs had been pleasant about it, Calvin said. Understanding. He'd said not to worry. He'd said these things happened. 3 weeks later, Calvin Patterson received a letter from Territorial Land Holdings, informing him that per the terms of his mortgage agreement, his property had been transferred to the company on the date of the missed payment, and he had 30 days to vacate. Calvin had gone to Briggs. Briggs had expressed deep regret. He'd said it was out of his hands, that these were the terms Calvin had agreed to, that he'd tried to warn people to read carefully. He'd offered to buy out Calvin's remaining livestock at a price that was roughly 60% of market value, as a courtesy. "The Patterson family is living in a tent behind the church," Ruth said. "Has been since May. Calvin's oldest girl is 11, and she comes to the well behind my office every morning for water, because they don't have a proper source where they're camped." She looked at Clara. "There are 3 other families in this district with late payments. They don't know what's coming. And Briggs has already filed the transfer paperwork with the county recorder. A man named Holt who does whatever Briggs tells him." The room was quiet. Nate's hands were on his knees, pressing hard enough that the knuckles had gone white. Clara was looking at the wall, but she wasn't seeing the wall. She was seeing a paragraph in the subparagraph of a contract, and she was thinking about language, about the specific and exact language of territorial property law, about the word supersede and what it required to invoke it, and whether 11 families' land was already gone, or whether there was still a seam in the wall to push through. "The county recorder," she said. "Holt. How long has he held the position?" Ruth looked at her. 3 years. Same time Briggs started handling agreements locally. Yes. Is he elected? Appointed by the District Land Committee. Ruth paused. Which Briggs chairs. Clara stood up. She picked up the oilskin packet and held it against her chest and looked at Ruth. "I need the statutes in 2 days, and I need you to tell me the name of the highest-ranking territorial official who is not connected to Harlan Briggs." Ruth thought for a moment. "Judge Aldous Crane, out of Helena. He's presided over 3 land fraud cases in the last decade. He doesn't like Briggs. I know this because Briggs told me once, in this office, that Judge Crane was a meddlesome old fool with no understanding of modern commerce." "Men say that about judges who can actually read contracts," Clara said. Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she did let the smile finish. "I'll have your statutes in 2 days, Miss Ashworth, and I'll send a separate wire to Judge Crane's clerk today, just to establish a line." They were halfway back to the ranch, the buckboard rolling through the heat of late morning, when Nate said it. "The Cole Ranch is the largest property on that list." "Yes," Clara said, "which means Briggs has been waiting, using the others to work out the process, making sure the transfer mechanism holds before he moves on the biggest one." "That's what I believe, yes. And the only reason he hasn't moved yet is that my payments are current, and there's no visible default to trigger the clause." "Correct." Nate looked at the road. The grass on either side moved in a dry wind off the mountains. "So as long as I keep paying, he waits." "As long as you keep paying and no one looks at the death provision." Clara held the packet in her lap. "But he knows I'm here now. He came to this ranch inside 2 hours of my arrival. Whatever he was told about me from Philadelphia, he knows I worked in a law office, and he knows I left under circumstances that suggest I was carrying something he'd rather I wasn't." "How long before he moves?" "I don't know, but I know he won't move until he understands what I have and who I've spoken to." She paused. "Which means we have a window. Small, but real." Nate was quiet for a moment. The buckboard wheel found a rut, and she caught the rail. He said, "You said we." She looked at him. "You've been saying it since this morning. We need the statutes. We have a window." His voice wasn't challenging, just noting. "I'm aware," she said. She looked back at the road. Her hand was still on the rail. A beat of silence. The bay mare's shoes on the packed dirt. The dry grass moving. "I don't mind it," Nate said. She said nothing, but her hand on the rail eased from a grip to something more like resting. That afternoon, she worked at the kitchen table with what she had. The 15 contracts, her notes from Philadelphia, and a territorial legal handbook she had packed at the bottom of her valise, along with her spare shirtwaist and her mother's thimble. She had carried the handbook because she had known, from the moment she stepped onto the train in Philadelphia, that she was going to need it. She spread it open to the section on estate law and worked her way through it with a pencil, marking every passage that touched on inheritance rights and the enforceability of private contract provisions against territorial statute. Nate worked outside. She could track him by sound: the fence posts along the east pasture, the hammer coming down in a steady rhythm, the occasional word to the bay gelding who'd been following him along the fence line all morning like a dog. Around 2 in the afternoon, the hammering stopped. She heard him at the well, then boots on the porch steps. He came in, set his hat on the nail, looked at the table covered in open documents and pencil markings, and didn't say anything about the mess. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one at the edge of the table where she had room for it. She didn't look up. "Thank you." He sat in the other chair and drank his coffee and looked at the wall and let her work. That was the thing she noticed. He did not ask what she was finding. He did not look over her shoulder. He did not suggest she explain it to him or summarize it or make it simpler. He sat with his coffee and his silence and let her work the way he let the horses move at their own pace through a gate. Present, available, not pushing. After 20 minutes, she said, "Here." He moved his chair around to her side of the table. She pointed to a paragraph in the handbook, then to the trigger clause in Nate's father's contract, then back to the handbook. "Section 6 of the Territorial Estate Statute," she said. "It says that any private contractual provision that contradicts the statutory inheritance rights of a surviving direct heir is void, unless the heir himself is a signatory to the contract." She looked at him. "Your father signed this agreement. You didn't." Nate looked at the 2 texts side by side. "That means the death provision is unenforceable against you." She said it carefully, making sure of each word. "If the statute applies, which it should. But I need the certified language from Helena to be certain, and I need to know how Briggs filed the agreement with the county recorder, because if he filed it under a different classification, he could have worked around it. Possibly. Men who build these structures think about every door." She sat back. "But this is a seam, and seams can be opened." He was close enough that she could see the lines around his eyes, the set of his jaw. He was looking at the statute text with the concentrated focus of a man who has been fighting a thing blind and has just been handed a light. "Clara," he said. Her name without the miss, just the name. He'd done it once before, in the barn doorway, but she had been moving away, and it had been different. This was at a kitchen table, with his shoulder 6 inches from hers, and the lamplight between them, and the weight of 11 families' worth of land in the documents under her hands. She looked at him. He said, "I'm going to need you to teach me how to read these." She looked at him for a moment. At the serious face, the jaw no longer clenched, the dark green eyes that she had been too careful to look at directly until 3 days ago, in the garden of a story that was already happening differently than either of them had planned. "I can do that," she said. Outside, the afternoon was burning itself out over the Bitterroot Ridge. The horses in the corral moved toward the trough. The dry grass moved. Somewhere down the Dillon Road, in a wood-paneled office above the main street, a man with a trimmed silver beard and a smile that cost nothing was sitting at a desk with a list of names. And somewhere near the top of that list was Nathaniel Cole. And just below it, newly added in careful ink, was a name that had arrived from Philadelphia 3 days ago and had already said too much to too many people. Harlan Briggs did not move fast. He had never needed to. But the wire Ruth McAllister had sent to Helena that morning was already moving at the speed of current through copper, and the woman at his kitchen table had just found a seam in 11 months of careful construction. And the window they had was real, and it was closing. The statutes came back in a day and a half. Ruth McAllister sent a boy out to the ranch on a gray pony, with the telegram folded inside a flour sack envelope. And Clara read it standing on the porch, with the morning still cool, and Nate at the corral behind her. She read it twice. Then she sat down on the top step and read it a third time, slowly, letting each line settle. Section 6 applied. The certified language from the Territorial Law Office in Helena confirmed it, in terms that left no interpretive room. A private contractual provision, contrary to statutory heir inheritance rights, was void against a non-signatory surviving heir. The death clause in Elias Cole's mortgage agreement could not legally transfer the ranch to territorial landholdings, while Nathaniel Cole lived and had not himself signed the document. The ranch was still Nate's. Had been all along. 11 months of standing on ground that should have been safe, and it was. She let out a breath that she had been holding, she realized, since she first read that trigger clause by lamplight 3 mornings ago. Nate came up from the corral when he saw her sit. He read the telegram over her shoulder, standing on the step below her. She felt him go still as he read it. Then he straightened up and looked at the Bitterroot Ridge for a long moment without speaking. "It holds," he said. "It holds. But Nate..." She turned to look up at him. "The other 4 families. The Pattersons and the 3 others with late payments. They signed the standard clause, not the death provision. Section 6 doesn't help them. Their transfers are already filed." He looked down at her. "But they're not enforceable yet." "They're filed. Whether they're enforceable depends on whether Briggs followed proper registration procedure, whether the county recorder processed them correctly, and whether a territorial judge is willing to look at the underlying fraud." She folded the telegram. "If we can get the full case to Judge Crane before Briggs serves the Patterson family a final vacate notice, there's a chance. Not a certainty, a chance." Nate sat down on the step beside her. Not 3 feet away, the way he'd kept the distance on the buckboard that first day. Beside her. Close enough that his arm was an inch from hers. "How long do the Pattersons have?" he said. "Ruth said the first notice went out in May. 30 days to vacate." She looked at her hands. "They're still in the tent behind the church, which means either Briggs hasn't enforced it yet, or Calvin Patterson refused to go, and Briggs hasn't pushed it to the sheriff." "Holt isn't the only one Briggs has in his pocket," Nate said. "The sheriff's a man named Doyle. He's not corrupt exactly, he's just..." He paused. "Convinced that Briggs is a legitimate businessman, and that anybody who says otherwise is a troublemaker." "Has anyone tried to tell Doyle what's in those contracts?" "Nobody in this county can read those contracts." He said it without accusation, just fact. The same way he'd said it on the buckboard. "I need someone who can read a contract without a 3-day ride to Billings." He had not known, then, how precisely true it was. She had not known then how much would depend on it. "I need to talk to Calvin Patterson," she said. Nate looked at her. "He's not going to want to hear it from a woman he's never met." "He doesn't have to want to hear it. He has to understand it." She stood up. "And I need to see the vacate notice Briggs sent him. The exact language. If Briggs made any procedural error in the filing, wrong form, wrong date, wrong classification, the whole transfer may be challengeable on grounds that don't even require the fraud argument." Nate was quiet for a moment. Then he stood up too. "I'll hitch the mare." They found Calvin Patterson behind the church, splitting wood beside the tent where his family had been living since May. He was a big man, gone thin, in the way men go thin when they've been worrying for months without stopping. The worry eating what the work doesn't. He stopped splitting when he saw the buckboard. He looked at Nate, then at Clara, then back at Nate with the expression of a man who has been told enough bad news that he now assumes every visitor brings more. "Nate," he said, Calvin? Nate stepped down. This is Miss Ashworth. She needs to ask you something about the notice Briggs sent. Calvin looked at Clara. Not unfriendly. Careful. You the one from Philadelphia? Yes, she said. She had stopped correcting it. You a lawyer? No, but I spent 5 years reading the same kind of documents that put your family in that tent. She looked at him directly. I'd like to see the vacate notice Briggs sent you. The original, if you still have it. Calvin looked at Nate again. Nate gave one small nod. The nod of a man vouching without words. Calvin set his axe against the woodpile and went into the tent and came back with a folded paper worn soft at the creases from being opened and refolded too many times by hands looking for something in it to argue with. Clara read it on the buckboard seat with Nate and Calvin standing in the dirt below her. She read it twice. Then she looked up. Mr. Patterson, she said, what date did you miss the payment? March 14th. And what date is on this notice? Calvin frowned. March 21st. The filing date stamped by the county recorder is March 16th. She held the paper up. 2 days after your missed payment. 5 days before the notice was generated. Calvin stared at her. Briggs filed the transfer with the county recorder before he notified you, she said. Before you had any legal opportunity to cure the default. Under territorial statute, a creditor is required to provide written notice and the 30-day cure period before initiating a transfer filing. She looked at the paper. He didn't wait 30 days. He didn't wait 30 hours. He filed on the 16th. You didn't receive notice until the 21st. The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Calvin Patterson sat down on the woodpile. He put his elbows on his knees and his face in his hands, and he sat there for a moment, making no sound at all. His daughter, the 11-year-old Ruth had mentioned, the one who came to the well every morning, appeared at the tent flap and looked at the adults gathered in the dirt, and then looked at her father, and her face did the thing children's faces do when they are trying to decide if this is bad news or good news, and cannot tell yet. The filing is procedurally defective, Clara said. She said it clearly, each word measured. That doesn't mean the fight is over. Briggs will argue, and he'll argue hard, and he has people in the recorder's office. But it means there is a legal basis to challenge the transfer. A real one. Calvin lifted his face. His eyes were red at the rims. Can you prove it? The date stamp is on the document, Clara said. It proves itself. She folded the notice carefully and held it out to him. Keep this. Do not let it out of your possession. And don't tell anyone outside this conversation what we've just discussed. Calvin took the paper. He looked at it, then at her. Why not? Because Briggs doesn't know yet what I have, or how much I've read. The moment he knows we're building a case, he'll move to secure everything he can before we can get to Helena. She looked at him steadily. We have a window, Mr. Patterson. We need to use it before he realizes it exists. Calvin looked at Nate. You trust her? Nate said, yes. One word. No qualification. Clara felt it land somewhere in her chest. That evening, she stayed at the kitchen table until the lamp burned low, working through the remaining contracts, annotating every procedural irregularity she could find. 3 of the 4 defective filings had date problems similar to the Patterson notice. The 4th was cleaner, but the agreement itself contained a clause she recognized from a Philadelphia case 2 years earlier, language that had been ruled unconscionable by a Pennsylvania court on the grounds that it was designed to obscure material terms from a non-expert signatory. Montana was not Pennsylvania. But Judge Crane's clerk had wired back to Ruth that same afternoon. The judge was familiar with the territorial landholding structure. He had been watching it for 18 months. He was interested in what Miss Ashworth had. She wrote that word on the top of her notes page. Interested. It was a judge's word for a door that was open. She did not hear Nate come in from the barn. She only knew he was there when a fresh cup of coffee appeared at the edge of the table where the old one had gone cold. She looked up. He was leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed, looking at the documents spread across the table with an expression she was starting to recognize. The one where he was thinking something he hadn't decided to say yet. "Go to bed, Clara," he said. "I'm close to something in the fourth contract." "It'll still be there in the morning." "Briggs doesn't stop working because it's dark." "Briggs isn't going to Helena tonight." He looked at her. "You haven't eaten since noon." She looked at the cold biscuits on the plate she'd set aside 3 hours ago. "I forgot." He went to the stove without comment, built the fire back up, put a pan on. She heard bacon, heard bread going onto the iron. She turned back to the fourth contract and read 2 more paragraphs before the smell reached her, and her stomach informed her bluntly that Nate was right. He set a plate on the table beside the documents without moving any of them, sat across from her. She ate standing up, leaning over the table, still reading. He watched her for a moment. Then he said, "Sit down." "I'm reading." "I can see that. Sit down anyway." She sat. She ate. The bacon was slightly burnt at the edges, and she didn't say anything about it, and he didn't either. And that small, silent reciprocity was so close to the way she and Nate had been operating for 5 days that she almost smiled. "The fourth contract," she said. "The Wicker Ranch, north of the creek. The agreement has language that I've seen challenged in Pennsylvania. Unconscionability doctrine. The idea that a contract is void if its terms were deliberately obscured from a party who lacked the expertise to understand them." She pushed the contract toward him. If a territorial court accepted that argument, it wouldn't just void the Wicker transfer. It would call into question every agreement Briggs structured using the same template, which is all 15. Nate looked at the contract, then at her. All 15. It's a long argument. It requires a judge willing to look at the full scope of what Briggs built. But Judge Crane's clerk said he's been watching territorial land holdings for 18 months. She looked at him. He's been waiting for someone to bring him the documents. Nate was quiet for a long moment. The fire in the stove popped. Outside, the night was deep, the kind of Montana dark that has actual weight to it, pressing against the windows. "There's something you should know," he said. She looked at him. "Briggs came to the ranch today, while you were in here, working." He said it evenly. "I was at the east fence. He rode out from the road and stopped at the gate. He didn't come through." Clara's hands stilled on the table. "He said he wanted to check on the north pasture boundary question, the same one he came about after my father died." Nate's jaw shifted. "He said it in that way he has, friendly, like he was doing me a favor." "What did he actually say?" "He said he hoped you were settling in well. He said Philadelphia women sometimes found the West difficult to adjust to." A pause. "He said if you needed any legal guidance, any questions about how things work out here, his door was always open." "He was warning me," Clara said. "He was warning you?" "He knows I've been looking at the contracts. He knows something's moving. He may not know how much." Nate looked at her directly. "He asked me how you were getting on, whether you seemed happy, whether you'd expressed any intention to go back east." The fire popped again. Clara looked at the plate in front of her, the half-eaten bacon, the bread with one bite taken. She thought about Harlan Briggs on his horse at the gate, with his hat on straight, and his pleasant voice, asking a man whether his wife seemed likely to stay. Asking it the way you ask about weather, as if the answer were a matter of mild curiosity. as if the answer did not determine what he did next. "He's deciding how much time he has," she said. "Yes. If he thinks I'm going to leave, he waits, watches." Nate folded his hands on the table. "If he thinks you're not going anywhere, he moves." She sat back. "Before we can get to Helena." The room was quiet. She could hear her own breathing and the fire and the weight of everything that was true and had to be dealt with, and could not be dealt with tonight because the Territorial Records Office was closed, and Judge Crane was in Helena, and Calvin Patterson's daughter was sleeping in a tent behind the church. "What did you tell him?" she said, "when he asked if I seemed happy?" Nate looked at her across the table. His expression was the plain, steady one, the face he used when he was saying something he'd already thought through and decided on. "I told him you were home," he said. It was such a simple sentence. 4 words, the same weight as "I'll be at the corral," or "Road's not bad until the creek." Said like a fact that had already been established and didn't require discussion. Clara looked at him. She opened her mouth and then didn't say anything because she didn't have the right words yet, and she had learned, in 5 days on this ranch, that Nate Cole's kind of plain speaking deserved plain speaking back, and she was not there yet, and he could wait. He stood up, carried his plate to the basin. "Send the wire to Judge Crane tomorrow," he said, "first thing before Dillon wakes up." "I will." He picked up his hat from the nail. "And Clara," she looked at him, "lock the door tonight." He said it without drama. Both bolts, front and back. He held her eyes for a moment, not the long, careful look of 5 days ago when he'd been measuring her the way she'd been measuring him. Something different, something that had moved past measuring into something more like knowing and caring what it knew. Then he put his hat on and went out. She heard his boots on the steps, the dirt, the distance to the barn. She heard the barn door open and close. She sat at the table for a moment with the cold coffee and the documents and the plate with the half-eaten supper, and she pressed her palms flat on the wood and breathed. He had told Briggs she was home. He had not asked her first. He had not offered her the sentence as a question or a possibility or something to be negotiated. He had answered a threatening man's probing question with 4 words that drew a line in the dirt and made her side of it clear without once making it about him. She gathered the documents, retied the oilskin packet, and carried it to the bedroom. She put it under the mattress, where it was out of sight but accessible. She latched the bedroom bolt. She went back to the front door and latched that one too. The front window faced the road. She stood at it for a moment in the dark, looking out. The Dillon road was empty and silver in the moonlight, and beyond it, the grass rolled away toward the Bitterroot. No riders, no dust. But she had learned, in 1 week of being Harlan Briggs's problem, that she didn't see the dangerous ones coming. You found their signatures in the subparagraph, 4 layers deep, after the damage was already filed at the county recorder's office. You found them in a date stamp 2 days early on a notice that a family had read 100 times without knowing what it meant. She stepped away from the window. Tomorrow, Ruth McAllister would open the telegraph office at 7, and Clara would be there when she did, and the wire to Judge Crane's clerk would go out before Dillon's Main Street had its boots on. And in Helena, an old judge who had been watching a particular structure for 18 months would read a message from a woman in Dillon who had been carrying the documents he needed inside an oilskin packet for 3 weeks across 2,000 miles. And he would make a decision. She did not know what that decision would be. She did not know if the window was still open or already closing. She did not know if 4 families' land was savable or already lost past the reach of statutes and certified copies and the careful, precise language of a woman who was good at finding things, that were not meant to be found. But she knew what she was doing in the morning. She knew the name of the judge. She knew where the seams were. And she knew, with a certainty that had nothing to do with contracts and everything to do with a man who had called her home without being asked, that she was not going to be moved from this table without a fight that Harlan Briggs was not yet prepared for. Ruth McAllister was unlocking the telegraph office door when Clara came around the corner of the post office at 7:05, the oilskin packet under her arm and the wire already written out on a folded piece of paper in her coat pocket. Ruth looked at her, looked at the paper in her hand, opened the door wider. "I had a feeling," Ruth said. The wire to Judge Crane's clerk took 11 minutes to compose and send. Clara stood at the counter and dictated it word by word. Specific, precise, no excess language. The existence of 15 fraudulent land agreements in the Dillon district. The procedural defects in 4 transfer filings. The death provision in the coal agreement. The corporate registration documents linking territorial land holdings to Harlan Briggs. The request for an emergency territorial court review before additional transfer filings could be enforced. Ruth's key moved fast and steady, and when it was done, she looked up and said, "It'll be on Crane's clerk's desk inside the hour." "How long for a response?" "Depends on whether Crane is in Helena or on circuit." Ruth set the key down. "If he's in the city, same day. If he's riding circuit, could be 3 days." 3 days. Clara looked at the folded paper on the counter. She was thinking about Briggs on his horse at the gate yesterday, asking Nate whether she seemed happy, and the particular patience of a man who had been building something for 3 years and was now deciding whether to accelerate or wait. "One more thing," Clara said. She pulled the Patterson vacate notice from the packet. "I need you to make a certified copy of this and hold the original here, under your name in your official capacity as telegraph and postal officer." Ruth looked at the document, at the date stamps, at Clara. "You're establishing a chain of custody. If Briggs realizes what we have, the first thing he'll do is get to the physical evidence, the contracts I carry, the notices the families received." Clara looked at her steadily. "He can get to me. He can't get to a certified copy filed in a federal postal officer's name without committing a federal crime." Ruth picked up the notice, studied it with the focused attention of a woman who had spent 30 years reading documents that mattered. "I'll need an hour. I'll be at the general store. Send someone when it's done." She was halfway to the store when she heard her name. She turned. Harlan Briggs was crossing the street from the direction of his office, his hat on straight, and his morning suit brushed, and his smile already in position. He walked like a man who has nowhere urgent to be, and has decided to make that your problem. "Miss Ashworth." He stopped 3 feet from her on the boardwalk. "Early morning for a trip to town." "There's no particular hour to send a letter, Mr. Briggs." "Of course not." His eyes went to the oilskin packet under her arm, stayed there 1 beat too long, then came back to her face. "I hope you're finding Dillon to your liking. It can seem small at first, coming from a city like Philadelphia." "I've found it suits me well," she said. "Good, good." He clasped his hands in front of him, the posture of a man settling in for a friendly conversation. "I wanted to ask, and please take this in the spirit of professional courtesy, whether you'd had a chance to look at the property agreement Nate's father signed. I know it can seem complicated to someone without a background in territorial land law. My door is open if you had any questions about the provisions." There it was, not quite a threat, an offer, the kind of offer that comes with the understanding that accepting it means agreeing to be confused, and that refusing it means declaring you are not. Clara looked at him. She thought about the trigger clause and the date stamps and the 11 months Nate had been paying installments on a ranch that Briggs thought was already his. She thought about Calvin Patterson's daughter at the well every morning. She thought about all the things she knew that Harlan Briggs did not yet know she knew. "I appreciate that, Mr. Briggs," she said. "If I find myself confused, I'll let you know." His smile stayed exactly where it was, exactly as wide. Not a muscle moved in it. And that stillness, the absolute professional control of a man who has heard what she didn't say and is filing it, told her more than any reaction would have. "Wonderful," he said. "Give my regards to Nate." He walked on. She stood on the boardwalk and watched him go, and made herself breathe at a normal pace, and waited until he turned the corner before she went into Hargrove's store. Martha Hargrove was behind the counter. She looked up, looked at Clara's face, and said, "Sit down before you fall down. I'm fine." "You're not, but we can pretend." Martha came around the counter and pulled a stool out from under the far end. "Sit." Clara sat. She pressed the oilskin packet against her chest with both arms and sat on the stool behind the counter in Martha Hargrove's store and let her heartbeat settle. "He knows," she said. "Briggs? What does he know?" "That I'm not confused." She looked at Martha. "Which means he knows I found something. He doesn't know yet what I found, or how much of it, or whether it's enough. But the not knowing is going to make him move faster than he planned." Martha was quiet for a moment, leaning against the counter with her thick-knuckled hands folded on top of it. "How fast?" "I don't know. But the Patterson family is still in that tent, and the 3 other families don't know their transfers are filed. And Judge Crane may be on circuit for 3 days." She pressed her palms flat on her knees. "We need the people on that list to know what's coming, before Briggs gets to them first." "Before he does what?" "Offers them a settlement," Clara said. "A buyout. Less than the land is worth, framed as a mercy. If a family signs a settlement agreement, they waive their right to challenge the original transfer. He's done it before. I found a reference to a settlement payment in the Philadelphia records. A ranch in Wyoming that was supposed to be part of the same structure." She looked at Martha. "He'll tell them they have no legal options. He'll tell them it's the best they're going to get. And he'll do it before they can talk to anyone who knows otherwise." Martha looked at her for a long moment. Then she straightened up and untied her apron. "My husband can run the store," she said. "He's useless before noon, but it's nearly 9. How many families?" 3, besides the Pattersons. 2 west of the creek, 1 north. I know all of them." Martha folded the apron over the counter. "I've known all of them since before their children were born. If I go to them, they'll listen." She looked at Clara. "What do I tell them?" "Tell them not to sign anything. Not a letter, not a notice, not a receipt. If Briggs or anyone connected to him puts paper in front of them, they wait. They come to me first." She paused. "And tell them there's a territorial judge who is looking at their agreements. That it's not over." "Is that true?" "It will be, if the wire does what it needs to do." Martha looked at her with the same measuring look she'd used the first day, looking for flaws, deciding if they were livable. "You came here with documents in your corset and a bruise on your face," she said. "And in 10 days, you found a seam in something Harlan Briggs spent 3 years building." "I found it because he made it," Clara said. "He got careful with the legal language, but he got impatient with the procedure. He filed 4 days early on the Patterson notice. He didn't think anyone out here could read the date stamps. He didn't think a woman from Philadelphia would be sitting at Nate Cole's kitchen table with the territorial statutes," Martha said. "No," Clara said. "He didn't." Martha picked up her coat from the hook behind the door. "I'll go to the families west of the creek first. Back by noon." She stopped at the door and looked back. "You tell Nate what Briggs said to you this morning?" "Not yet." "Tell him." Martha opened the door. "He's not a man who likes being the last to know when someone's circling his property." Clara was back at the ranch by mid-morning. Nate was at the south fence with the gray gelding loaded with supplies, and when she came up the road in the buckboard, he turned and looked at her face and set the hammer down. She told him about Briggs on the boardwalk. All of it, word for word, the way she reported things, full and exact. He listened without interrupting, which was something she'd noticed he always did. He listened the way he read the contracts, all the way through before he said anything. When she finished, he picked up the hammer and turned it over in his hand once, then set it on the fence post. "He came to you," he said, "not to me. He thinks you can be managed. He thinks I'm the problem. He's right about that." His voice was dry, but his eyes weren't. "What do we do if Crane is on circuit?" "We document everything we can, and we make sure the families don't sign settlements." She looked at him. "And we stay visible. Briggs operates in the spaces where people don't know what's happening. The moment this becomes something the whole town can see and name, his leverage shrinks." Nate looked at the fence line, at the post he'd been working. "You mean we make it public?" "I mean we stop being quiet about what we know." She held his eyes. "I know that's a risk. If we move before Crane responds, Briggs can prepare a legal defense. But if we wait, and he gets to those families with settlement offers..." "We lose the cases before they start," Nate said. "Yes." He was quiet. She could see him working it through the way he worked through everything, methodically, no wasted motion, starting from what was solid and moving outward. "All right," he said. "What do you need from me?" "I need you to talk to the men," she said. "The husbands. They're not going to take this from me. Not easily, not immediately. But they'll hear it from you." He picked up the hammer again, set it in the supply pack on the gelding's back. "You know what that means," he said. "If I go to 3 ranchers in this district and tell them Harlan Briggs defrauded them, and Crane doesn't come through, and the transfers hold..." "You've made enemies you can't afford," she said. "I know." He looked at her. "I know what I'm asking," she said. "I know this is your land, and your neighbors, and your standing in this county that you've held for 30 years. And I'm asking you to put it on a case built on documents I carried here from Philadelphia, inside an oilskin packet that your land agent already knows I have." She didn't look away. "If you tell me no, I'll understand it." The silence between them was the working kind, full, not empty. "When did I tell you no?" he said. She opened her mouth, closed it. "Get the names," he said. "I'll ride this afternoon." He was gone by noon, taking the gray gelding north toward the Wicker property, and then west to the 2 families beyond the creek. Clara went back to the kitchen table, and the documents, and the waiting that was the hardest part of everything she'd done since Philadelphia. The wire from Judge Crane came at 3 in the afternoon. Ruth sent her grandson with it, a boy of 12 who arrived at a full gallop and handed the telegram to Clara on the porch, with the slightly stunned expression of a boy who has been told his errand is urgent and has taken that seriously. She tore it open. "Have reviewed preliminary information. Procedural defects consistent with pattern previously documented in Billings, 1881, and Miles City, 1882. Am returning to Helena from circuit Thursday. Request complete documentation. Will issue temporary restraining order on further transfer filings pending full review. Send certified copies via registered mail, care of Territorial Court, Helena, immediately." She read it twice. Then she sat down on the porch step with the telegram in her lap and pressed her hand flat over it and stayed very still for a moment. Thursday. Crane would be in Helena Thursday. 2 days from now. A temporary restraining order. It would not return the Patterson land. It would not undo what was already filed, but it would freeze every pending transfer in the district, which meant the three families who had not yet received final notices had time, and time was the thing she had been trying to buy since the moment she sat down at this table. She was still sitting on the step when she heard the gelding on the road. Nate came through the gate, and she stood up and held the telegram out when he was still 10 feet away. He read it on horseback, leaning down from the saddle, and when he looked up, his face had the expression she recognized now, the clenched jaw going loose, the thing behind his eyes that was not quite relief because it was not over, but was the specific feeling of a floor holding under your weight when you weren't sure it would. "Thursday," he said. "Thursday." He dismounted, stood in the yard with the gelding's reins in one hand and the telegram in the other, and looked at her. "The families?" Wicker agreed to hold. He was angry, at Briggs mostly, which is appropriate. "The Hendersons west of the creek will hold. But Elias Henderson wants to be in the room when you deliver the documents to Crane. I told him I've asked you." He paused. "And Daniel Marsh, the third one. He'd already received a letter from Briggs this morning, offering to buy out his livestock." Clara's stomach tightened. "Did he sign anything?" "No. His wife told Briggs's man to come back Thursday. She said her husband wasn't home." Nate folded the telegram. "She lied. He was in the barn. She bought us 2 days." A rancher's wife who had looked at a man from Briggs's office and told a clean, flat lie to protect her family and her land. Clara thought about that for a moment, about the particular courage of a woman in a kitchen, deciding in 3 seconds what she was willing to do. "Mrs. Marsh," she said. "What's her name?" "Eleanor." "We should tell Eleanor Marsh about the wire from Crane," Clara said. "She bought us the time. She should know it was worth buying." Nate looked at her. "I'll ride back tomorrow morning." They ate supper at the kitchen table, with the telegram between them and the document stacked to one side, and the Territorial Statute Handbook open to Section 6. Clara had been thinking all afternoon about the registered mail packet she needed to prepare for Helena. The certified copies, the annotated contracts, the Patterson notice with its damning date stamps, the corporate registration documents linking Briggs to territorial land holdings. She needed it ready to go on the first stage to Miles City tomorrow morning, which meant she needed to have it finished tonight. She said so. Nate said he'd clean up and she could stay at the table. He washed the plates, and she worked, and neither of them talked for an hour. And it was the most ordinary thing. A man at the basin, a woman at the table, a lamp between them. And the ordinariness of it was startling, in the way that only things you've been without for a very long time can be startling when they return. She was tying the registered packet when he set his coffee cup on the table and said her name. Not Miss Ashworth, not with any particular weight, just her name, the way he said it now. She looked up. He was looking at the packet in her hands, at the oilskin and the string and the stack of certified copies that represented 11 families and 3 years of a man's careful construction and a woman's 5 years of reading things that were not meant to be read. "When this is over," he said, "when Crane has it, and the order is in, and the cases are filed." He stopped. His jaw worked once in that way it had when he was getting to something he'd been standing near for a while without saying it. "I don't know what you planned, when you agreed to come here, what you thought it would be." She set the packet down. "I didn't plan much past the train." "I know." He looked at the table, at his hands on it. "I ordered a wife the way a man orders a stove. Something practical, something that would work." He said it without apology and without pride, just factually, the way he said everything. "I wasn't thinking about... I didn't expect..." He stopped again. The stove ticked. Outside the night was full and dark and the crickets were going. "Nate," she said. He looked at her. "What are you trying to say?" He looked at her for a long moment with that plain, direct look that had nothing performing in it. "I'm trying to say that you're not a stove," he said. "And I've known that for about 6 days, and I didn't want to say anything wrong about it." She looked at him across the table, across the documents and the lamp and the years of careful distance that both of them had been maintaining since a stage door opened in Dillon and a woman with an oilskin packet stepped down into the dust. "You haven't said anything wrong," she said. It was not a declaration. It was not the sentence she might have said if she'd had more time or less history or a different past year. But it was true, and it was precise, and it was exactly the kind of language that Nathaniel Cole understood. The kind that said what it meant without ornament, that laid a fact on the table and let it sit there. He nodded once, the way he nodded when something was settled. She picked up the packet and tied the last knot and set it by the door for morning. Neither of them heard the horse on the road until it was already past the gate. By the time Clara looked up and Nate was at the window, the rider was already at the porch. And it was not one rider, it was 2. Nate went to the door. The first man she didn't know. 40, broad, the build of a man who rode for hire and didn't ask what for. He sat his horse without getting down and said nothing. The second man stepped up onto the porch and knocked twice on the open door frame and looked past Nate at Clara, sitting at the table with the packet in front of her. And Clara felt the blood go out of her face, because she knew that face. She had known it since she was 7 years old. Warren Ashworth took his hat off and held it in both hands, the precise gesture of a courteous man, and looked at his niece across the width of Nathaniel Cole's kitchen, with the flat, careful eyes of someone who has come a very long way to finish a conversation. "Clara," he said, "I think it's time we talked." Nate did not step back from the doorway. He stood in it the way he'd stood at the fence gate when Dale Cololton rode up in the reference script. Not aggressive, not retreating, just present. A man who had decided where his feet were going to be and had put them there. "You're on private property," Nate said. Warren Ashworth looked at him with the measured patience of a man who has spent 30 years in rooms where other people set the terms and has learned to wait them out. He was 60, silver-haired, dressed for travel but not roughly. The coat of a man who does not accept discomfort as inevitable. His hands on the hat were still. His face was still. Everything about him was still, in the way that meant he had already decided how this was going to go, and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. "I'm Clara's family," he said. "I've come a long way." "She can hear you from there," Nate said. "She'll tell you if she wants to talk." Clara had not moved from the table. She was sitting with both hands flat on the oilskin packet, and she was looking at her uncle, and she was doing the thing she had learned to do in her uncle's office, taking inventory before speaking. His coat, his hands, the hired man on the horse behind him, who had not dismounted, and whose eyes were on Nate and not on her. The hat held in 2 hands, the gesture of a courteous man, the gesture she had watched Harlan Briggs use that same morning on the Dillon boardwalk. 2 men, same gesture, same city. "You wired Briggs," she said. Warren looked at her. "Clara, when I left Philadelphia, you wired him." She kept her voice level and precise, all the roughness taken off. "You arranged the match through a Philadelphia agency, and you told Briggs which agency you used and what name to look for. He was on this porch inside 2 hours of my arrival." She looked at her uncle. "You sent me here, and then you told him I was coming." Warren was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I sent you somewhere safe, "You sent me somewhere contained," she said. "There is a difference. I know which is which." He stepped into the doorway. Nate shifted his weight, and Warren stopped. He looked at Nate with the first genuine expression he'd shown. Not anger, not exactly. The look of a man recalculating. "I'm not here to cause trouble," Warren said. "I'm here because what Clara took from my office is going to cause harm to people who don't deserve it, and I'd like the chance to explain that to her directly." "People who don't deserve it," Clara said. "There are investors behind territorial land holdings who are legitimate businessmen. The rail line is real. The development is real. What Briggs did with the contract language was—" He paused, chose his word. "Aggressive. I will grant you that. But the underlying enterprise took the Patterson family's land," Clara said. "They're living in a tent behind the Dillon church. Their daughter walks to the well every morning because they don't have a water source where they're camped." She looked at him. "She's 11 years old, Uncle Warren." Warren's jaw moved. "That's Briggs's doing, not—" "You wrote the contracts." Her voice did not rise. It went flatter and more precise, the way it went when she was most certain of what she was saying. "I know your sentence construction. I know your paragraph structure. I read 15 agreements in that packet, and I knew before I found the corporate registration that the same man drafted every one of them. The same man who trained me." She pressed her hands on the oilskin. "You built this. Briggs executed it. The distinction does not change what the Patterson girl sees when she wakes up in the morning." The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, the hired man's horse shifted weight. The crickets filled the gap. Warren looked at the packet under her hands. Something crossed his face. Not guilt. She knew his face too well to call it guilt. Something closer to the recognition that a thing he had built carefully and considered thoroughly had turned out to contain something he had not fully looked at, and that someone who loved him had been the one to look at it, and that this was its own kind of consequence. "If that goes to Helena," he said, "there will be a federal investigation. The investors I mentioned, some of them are men with families, men who will lose—" "Men who signed documents knowing what they were signing," Clara said. "Unlike the ranchers who signed them not knowing." She looked at her uncle steadily. "The certified copies are already with Ruth McAllister in her official capacity. The wire to Judge Crane went this morning. The restraining order is already in motion." She paused. "There is nothing you can take from this table that changes what is already moving." Warren was silent for a long moment. He looked at the packet, at his niece, at the man standing in the doorway who had not moved and was not going to. "I came to ask you to stop," Warren said. His voice had lost something. Not its control. He was not a man who lost control. But the specific confidence of a person who believes they still have options. That was gone. "Clara, I am asking you." "I know you are," she said. "As your family—" "You are the man who locked me in an office for 3 days," she said, "because I would not lie about what I read. You are not here as my family. You are here as a man who built something he doesn't want examined." She looked at him, not the careful, angled look she'd been giving men for a year, the one with the exit built into it. Straight on. "You should go, Uncle Warren. You should go before Thursday, which is when Judge Crane will be in Helena, and the packet will arrive by registered mail." Warren held her eyes. His hands tightened on the hat, the first movement he'd made in 5 minutes. Then he put the hat on, settled it, looked at Nate. "You have no idea," Warren said quietly, "what you've let into your house." "Yes, I do," Nate said. Warren looked at him for a moment. Then he turned and walked back to his horse and mounted, and the two riders went out the gate and down the Dillon road, and the sound of their hoofbeats flattened out across the dark grass, and then there was nothing left of them but the direction they'd gone. Nate closed the door, turned around. Clara was still at the table. Her hands were still flat on the oilskin packet, but she was looking at the middle distance, and her shoulders had the set of someone who has been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and has just been told they can put it down, and is not yet sure their arms remember how. Clara, Nate said. She looked at him. You all right? She thought about the question. She thought about the last year, the Philadelphia office, the 3 days on the floor, the train station at 2 a.m, the stage to Dillon, the bruise that had been purple-black when she arrived and was now only a memory of itself on her cheekbone. She thought about the table she was sitting at, and the bolt on the bedroom door, and the man standing 10 feet away who had just told Warren Ashworth, "Yes, I do," without flinching. "Yes," she said. And then, because it was true, and because she had learned that this man understood the language of plain-spoken facts, "I am." He crossed to the table, sat across from her, looked at the packet. "He'll go to Briggs tonight," Nate said. "Yes, and Briggs will know by morning that the wire has already gone to Helena, and that the certified copies are with Ruth." She looked at the packet. "He has 2 choices. He can ride hard for Helena and try to get to the territorial office before the mail does, which will take him past Crane and likely accelerate the investigation. Or he can stay in Dillon and prepare a legal defense, which requires him to find a lawyer who can argue against documents I've been studying for 7 months. Is there a third choice? He could run," she said, "but his assets are tied to the land holdings. He can't liquidate fast enough to make running worthwhile." She looked at Nate. "He built something complicated and valuable, and he will fight to keep it. But he built it on the assumption that no one out here could read it. That assumption is gone." Nate nodded. He looked at the table between them, at the lamp, at the distance that had been 3 feet on the buckboard that first day, and was now the width of a kitchen table, which was a different kind of distance entirely. "I need to ask you something," he said. She waited. "Your uncle said you knew what those contracts were 7 months ago." He looked at her directly. "You were in Philadelphia 7 months ago, with documentation of 15 fraudulent land agreements, and a law office behind you, and a city full of lawyers, and a federal land office 1 stage ride away." He paused. "Why Montana?" It was the question she had been waiting for him to ask since the buckboard, since the bolt on the door, since the first morning they'd sat on the porch steps with their coffee and watched the sun come up. The question she had been waiting to be asked, because the answer required something she had not been sure, until very recently, that she was capable of giving. "Because the land office in Helena had not answered Ruth McAllister's 2 telegrams," she said. "Because the Philadelphia records were in my uncle's building, and I no longer had access to them. Because the lawyers I knew worked for firms that did business with territorial land holdings." She looked at the table. "Because I had been locked in an office for 3 days, and when Margaret unlocked it and said, 'Go now,' I went. And the only thing I had was a ticket and an advertisement for a ranch in Montana that needed someone who could read contracts." She looked up at him. "And because I was so tired of being somewhere that had already been decided. I wanted to go somewhere that hadn't been yet." Nate was quiet for a long moment. "And here," he said, "has it been decided?" She looked at him across the lamp and the table and the oilskin packet that had crossed 2,000 miles inside her coat and under her mattress and in her 2 hands when there was nowhere else to keep it. She looked at him, the plain face, the dark green eyes, the jaw that had stopped clenching sometime in the last 5 days and had not gone back. And she thought about 4 words said to a man at a gate. She is home. Said without being asked. Said without asking her first. Said as a fact that had already been established and didn't need discussion. The way he said everything that was true. I think it's being decided, she said, right now. Something moved in his face. Not the ghost of a smile. The thing before the ghost. The decision to let it be. His hand on the table moved an inch toward hers and stopped, palm up, open. Not reaching, just there. She looked at his hand, at the calluses she knew by now, the ropework ones across the base of the fingers, the hammer one at the thumb base, the fence post ones along the outer edge. The hand of a man who built things and fixed things, and had put a bolt on a bedroom door before she arrived and called her home to a man who had come to take her away. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, firm and dry and warm and not letting go. They sat like that for a moment, at the kitchen table with the lamp between them and the oilskin packet and the territorial statute handbook and the whole weight of what was still ahead. Crane and the court and the Pattersons and the 3 other families and a district land agent who was going to fight for every inch of what he'd built. All of it still there. None of it resolved. None of it easy. But his hand was around hers, and the bolt was on her side of the door, and she had just told a man who had locked her in a room that she would not stop. And she had meant it. And she was still here. Thursday came with a hard, clear sky and a wind off the Bitterroot that smelled like the first edge of autumn. Clara was at the telegraph office when Ruth opened at 7. The registered packet had gone out on the Tuesday stage and would be in Helena by now, in the hands of Judge Crane's clerk, being read by a man who had been waiting 18 months for exactly what it contained. Harlan Briggs had not left Dillon. She had thought he might run, and he had not. He had gone instead to his office on Wednesday morning, and by afternoon the town knew, the way small towns know things through the movement of people and the direction of conversations, and the particular silence that falls when someone important is afraid, that something was happening. Martha Hargrove had told her that Briggs had sent for a lawyer from Billings, that the lawyer was expected Thursday. He's preparing a defense, Clara told Ruth. Let him prepare, Ruth said. She was already at the key. Crane sent a follow-up wire this morning. The restraining order was filed with the territorial court at 8 o'clock last night. No transfer filings in this district can be enforced until further review. She looked at Clara. It's done. The freeze is in. Clara stood at the counter and let that settle. The freeze. 11 families. The Patterson girl at the well. Eleanor Marsh and her flat clean lie to the man at her door. The 3 other families who had not yet been served and would not be served now, not while the restraining order held, not while Judge Crane had the packet and the timestamps and the corporate registration and the full annotated weight of 7 months of Clara Ashworth's reading. She thought about her uncle riding through the dark toward Dillon and Harlan Briggs. She thought about the conversation they would have had, Briggs with his structured smile, and Warren Ashworth with his careful stillness, and the 2 of them looking at each other across the fact that the thing they had built had been read, fully and correctly, by the woman they had tried to move out of the way by moving her 2,000 miles. She thought about Briggs telling Warren it was under control. She thought about whether either of them had believed it. Miss Ashworth. She turned. Calvin Patterson was standing in the doorway of the telegraph office. He had his hat in his hands and his oldest daughter behind him, the 11-year-old Eleanor, who had been coming to this well every morning since May. The girl was looking at Clara with the direct, undefended look of a child who has not yet learned to hide what she wants to know. "Ruth told me about the judge," Calvin said. His voice was rough at the edges. "About the order." "It's filed," Clara said. "No one can enforce a transfer in this district until the full review is complete. It buys time for the court to examine the contracts." Calvin was quiet for a moment. He looked at his hat. The brim had gone soft from being turned too many times in too many worried hands. He looked up. "Is it enough? To get the land back?" Clara looked at him. She thought about the date stamps on the Patterson notice, the procedural defect that was right there in black ink, the filing 2 days before the required notification period, the kind of error that a territorial judge with 18 months of documentation and a restraining order and a woman's 7 months of annotations would not miss. She thought about the unconscionability argument and the other 3 families, and the pattern that Crane had already recognized from Billings and Miles City in 1881 and 1882. She thought about certainty and what it cost to offer it prematurely, and she thought about what it cost not to. "I believe so," she said. "I cannot promise, but I believe the procedural defect in your notice alone is grounds for the transfer to be voided. And I have 14 other agreements that show the same pattern of construction. A judge looking at 15 of the same document does not see an error. He sees a method." Calvin looked at his daughter. She was still watching Clara with those undefended eyes. He put his hand on the girl's shoulder. "Her name's Clara," he said. "My wife named her after her grandmother." He paused. "I didn't know it was your name, too, until Martha told me." Clara looked at the girl, at the straight back and the watching eyes and the particular stillness of a child who has spent months in a tent listening to her parents worry through thin canvas walls. "Hello, Clara," she said. The girl said, "Are we going home?" The question sat in the room the way questions sit when they've been held for a long time by someone too young to have been carrying them. "Yes," Clara said. "I'm going to do everything I can to make sure you go home." The girl looked at her for a moment. Then she nodded once, a sharp, decided nod, the nod of someone who has made an assessment and acted on it. And she looked at her father and took his hand. Calvin looked at Clara. He didn't say anything. He put his hat on and walked out with his daughter, the 2 of them crossing the Dillon Main Street in the Thursday morning light, and Clara watched them go. Nate was at the gate when she got back to the ranch. He had the gray geldings saddled and the news all ready. Ruth had sent word, and he was reading the telegram about the restraining order with the expression she knew now, the one where the floor had held. He looked up when she came through the gate. "Crane filed," he said, "last night." She climbed down from the buckboard. "The Billings lawyer Briggs sent for arrived this morning. He'll review the contracts and tell Briggs what I already know, which is that the procedural defects are real, and the unconscionability argument is viable, and the corporate registration documents I carried from Philadelphia are going to be the center of a federal investigation." She looked at him. "It's going to take time. It won't be clean. Briggs will fight every inch." "But the families are protected while he fights." "Yes, while the order holds, they're protected." Nate folded the telegram, put it in his shirt pocket. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the statute text the first time she showed it to him, all the way through before saying anything. "Your uncle left last night," he said. "Took the road back east. Lester at the livery saw him go." Clara nodded. She had expected that. Warren Ashworth was not a man who stayed in losing positions. He would go back to Philadelphia and find a lawyer and prepare a careful, well-constructed defense. And it would be better than Briggs's defense, because Warren had always been better at the work than the men he worked with. But his defense would be built against documents that were already in a federal court's hands. And it would be built by a man whose name was on the corporate registration alongside Harlan Briggs. And those were not problems that careful construction could fully solve. She would probably have to go to Helena to testify. She had known that since she sent the first wire. She had been thinking about what that meant, sitting in a territorial courtroom and saying in plain language what she had read and how she had read it and what it meant, in front of a judge and a packed gallery and whatever version of Warren Ashworth showed up to watch her do it. She was not afraid of it. She had been afraid of it in Philadelphia. She was not afraid of it now. "I may need to go to Helena," she said, "when Crane calls the full review." "I know. It may be difficult. Briggs's lawyer will come after my credibility. My uncle may testify that I misread the contracts." "He'd be lying." "Yes, and I'd prove it." She looked at Nate. "But I want you to know what's coming, before it gets here." He looked at her steadily. "You told me what was coming on the buckboard that first day," he said. "I read the statute text. I rode to 3 ranches. I stood at a gate when your uncle came to this property." He paused. "What part of what's coming do you think I'm not prepared for?" She looked at him. At the plain face, the serious eyes, the jaw that had been clenched the whole first week and had stopped, because something between them had stopped requiring it. "None of it," she said. He nodded. "Once. The settled kind." He reached into the saddlebag on the gray gelding and took out a small wrapped parcel, brown paper, tied with a piece of cord, and held it out to her. She took it, unwrapped it. It was a ledger. New. Red cover, good binding, the pages clean and blank from front to back. On the inside of the front cover, in Nate's handwriting, slow, careful, the handwriting of a man who writes with intention and not often, was a single line. Cole Ranch Accounts. C. Ashworth Cole. 1884. She looked at the name, at the 2 names side by side, the way they sat on the page like something that had been decided quietly and then written down. She looked at him. "That's presumptuous," she said. "Yes," he said. "I haven't agreed to anything." "I know." He looked at her. "I thought I'd write it down and see how it looked." She looked at the ledger, at the name, at the way it sat on the page, not tentative, not asking, just present, the way he put all the true things. She looked at it for a long moment, and she thought about the bolt on the door, and the rhubarb pie, and the word "we," and the 4 words he had said to a man at a gate, and the way he had held her hand across a kitchen table in the dark and not let go. She closed the ledger, held it against her chest with both hands. "I'll need a proper desk," she said. "The kitchen table is fine for now, but if I'm managing accounts and reviewing contracts long-term, I'll need something with more surface." Nate looked at her for one long, steady moment. "I've got lumber," he said. She looked at him. At the corner of his mouth, the place where the smile would be, the place she had been watching for 2 weeks for the smile to finish. It finished. Slow, real, the kind that costs something because it comes from somewhere it had been kept for a long time. She felt her own face do the same thing. The morning light came down off the Bitterroot Ridge and across the coal ranch and fell on 2 people standing in a yard in Montana Territory in the autumn of 1884. A man who had stopped standing on hollow ground, and a woman who had stopped running from the thing she was. And it was not the end of anything. The court case would be long. The fight with Briggs would be longer. Eleanor Patterson would not be home by Christmas. But she would be home. The desk would take 2 weeks to build, and the ledger would take years to fill. And there were still mornings when Clara woke before dawn and lay still and listened to make sure the sounds were the right sounds. But the bolt was on her side of the door. The documents were in Helena, in the hands of a judge who knew how to read them. And the man across the yard was already walking toward the barn to find his lumber. And she was already following him. And the name on the inside cover of the ledger was hers. Both names, chosen and given, written down in careful ink by a man who had decided to put it there and had let her decide what to do with it. She had decided. Clara Ashworth Cole walked across the yard of the Cole Ranch with a new ledger pressed against her chest and the bitterroot wind in her face. And she did not look back at the road, not once, because there was nothing on it anymore worth turning around for.